grew up in Toronto, Canada, and I was an avid reader. I read a lot. And even as a young child, I loved to read historical fiction. I read Gone with the Wind and loved it. You know, it was history, it was a wonderful story, wonderful characters. And then I read a lot of stories about the Second World War. I read The Diary of Anne Frank, of course. So I think first historical fiction, and then I focused quite early on the history of the Second World War. I still have my journals that I kept when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. I wrote poetry, I wrote songs, I wrote short stories, I wrote comic strips. So even though I was working in psychology, I think I always knew that at some point I would like to do more writing and more formal writing. I took a 2-year leave of absence. And during that time, I wrote, I painted, I did all of the things that I really loved and wanted to do. All of my books are stories about the Second World War and the Holocaust. And that history is very important to me. It's family history. Both of my parents were survivors. My mother survived the war in hiding. That's her story in The Secret of Gabby's Dresser. My father was a survivor of the concentration camps. And my parents were talkers. You know, they talked very openly about their survival history, even when I was a young child. And when I wrote The Secret of Gabby's Dresser, my first book, my children were young. My parents had passed away, and I was looking for a way to tell my children the history of my parents. It's always emotional to talk about this history, and I have to tell you, it must be emotional to talk about this history. If you don't connect with the pain of this history, then you're not telling a truthful story. I think you must be sensitive to where the child is in their development. If we take Gabby's Dresser as an example, it's the story of one girl who is not unlike the young girls or the young boys that I meet in the schools and libraries when I travel around the world. And so she is a person whom they can connect with. And so in connecting with her and learning about her, they learn a little bit about her difficult life as well. I have a wonderful experience talking with young people in schools. I love talking to young people. My characters went to schools just as children went to schools. They had friends just as the children I meet had friends. They came from families, some loving, some less loving, but they had brothers and sisters and parents and grandparents just like the children I meet. I think it's very important that children understand that the survivors of the Holocaust, those whom I write about, were ordinary children, just like them. And I love when children refer to my characters by their first name. You know, what did Gabby do? What did Clara think? What did Laura say? You know, and when they begin to refer to the character by their first name, then I know that they've made a connection, a meaningful connection with that character. Now more than ever, we must record the history of as many survivors as possible. Because when this generation of survivors is gone, then all the first person accounts of that history will also be gone. The voices will be gone. There have been many more wars over the years that have taken a more prominent place versus the Holocaust. But there is still too much that we must learn from that war and that time. When I meet a group of children here in Brazil, we may speak a different language at times, but I think they are interested in the same things, curious about the same things, critical at times about the same things. And so it's like meeting children anywhere in the world. I have to say that I never imagined I would be in this place in my life. 15 books about the Holocaust. I didn't set out to become a writer of Holocaust stories. I set out to write one book, and now there has been this full second career for me. And the more books I write, the more stories I discover I must tell. Every time I think I've written the last book that I'm going to write about the Holocaust, another remarkable story comes to me, and I know I must write one more.